Hello everyone and welcome back to Exploder. We are here with yet another episode. Of course we are. This is the intro I do every single show. I'm thinking of changing it up. We'll see. This episode I want to talk about wrestling, how you attained it, how you would get it back in the day. Modern wrestling fans do not understand the ubiquity, wow, that's another fancy word, ubiquity, the access that they now have. You have an app on your phone, you have a network on your PlayStation or your Amazon or whatever you have. You're able to access hundreds, decades and decades and decades of wrestling from all different companies through a click of a mouse or a controller button. Not only do you have that, you have websites, you have on demand, you have DVDs. I'm sure there's a VHS out there of Hulk Hogan somewhere in Bangladesh that's getting the hell played out of it. Point is, wrestling now is so widespread. I think fans now don't understand how hard it used to be to actually get wrestling. It used to be hard to get information about wrestling. So in this episode, I want to talk about how we used to get wrestling between shows. I talked about the B shows a couple shows ago, and how you would have the wraparound shows on weekends that would sort of get you from Monday to Monday and week to week. And now I want to talk about how you would get wrestling when wrestling wasn't on TV. That's right, I'm talking about magazines, hotlines, things that would bring the action to you even though it wasn't on TV, because wrestling was only on a couple times a day. Now I explained in a couple episodes ago in the B shows the amount of television, but if there's a day, let's say a Tuesday, there's really nothing on Tuesday, and you really were a wrestling fan like I was a big wrestling fan growing up, still am. I was a nerd. I was a wrestling nerd back then. I'll be first one to talk about it. I'll be the first one to admit that. I probably was a little obsessed, you could probably say. But one thing about wrestling was how you got the information and how you would get it from all these different sources. Now, there are different kinds of sources. Now I'm going to start talking about magazines. Magazines were a big industry. I know. I'm talking to a generation right now that if they've heard of a magazine, it's like Newsweek, and it's behind a glass case with dust gathering at a museum. But it used to be wrestling magazines before the internet came in and just pillaged the whole place. Wrestling magazines were the place to be. WWE magazine, WWF magazine, started as Victory magazine. It ran for a couple issues, and then it became the WWF magazine, which it was until it became officially the WWE magazine. And that ended, I believe, in 2011. Actually, the last issue of WWE magazine, it featured the Shield, if that tells you anything. So I may not be 100% on the date there. I could be wrong here. I'm not claiming to be an expert, but it went for a long run. But it discontinued because, well, it was a magazine in the 2010s, and those things are like dinosaurs these days. You might as well be driving your Model A to a Victrola store. And if you know what either one of those things are, well, first of all, if you know what they are, you know history. If you've ever used one of them, you are old. I don't mean to insult my listeners, but that's what it is. Sorry. WWF had a magazine, of course. WCW had a magazine, which was very similar to the WWF magazine. It was a lot of kayfabe. They would bring stuff in and they would use angles and they'd talk about things that were completely kayfabe. There really wasn't real interviews. There weren't really, how to put it this way, they weren't giving you any real information. They were giving you crafted information that was kayfabe to get you, again, like the B shows, get you to the next show. If they wanted to pump up Survivor Series, well, then they'd have an article about how Andre the Giant and the Ultimate Warrior didn't get along and how it was going to lead up to that. That was the point, and they were promotional materials. WWF magazine actually lasted for so long because, in all honesty, it was good at what it did. It was promotional. It was kayfabe. It was that piece of material that you could read at school, at church. I read them at church. I read them at school. I read them on recess. I read them whenever I could. That was my thing. And I have more than my fair share still sitting in a cupboard somewhere at my parents' house, I think. I'm pretty sure I still have a lot of. So I don't know. I might, if I go back over there and I find them, I might bring some out, get some pictures, get threatened with the cease and desist by WWE. You know, good times. But until that day, we'll see. The WWF magazine went through transition. It was, of course, very kiddie. It was very child-centered. I guess that's the way to put it. That's the weirdest way I could probably say that. But it was, well, in the 80s with Hogan and in the 90s, they used to have a comic in the back called Scoops, and he would go on these adventures and he would run into WWF superstars along the way in very cartoony situations, and it really fits the theme, I guess. They would have viewer questions, people that would read them and send in questions, and sometimes they were just innocuous. They were, how'd you get your nickname? How'd you get this, and of course, someone at the magazine would write an answer and act like the 1-2-3 kid answered it, because I can't imagine Isaac Yankem was sitting down there seriously writing out responses. I mean, geesh, what's he think he is, the mayor? Still, the point is, there was a lot going on. There was posters always. There was this, it was very kid-centered. And then during the brand extension, there was a split split. Well, let's back up a little bit. I want to back up a little bit. I went a little fast there. In 1996, the WWF was teasing a change. They were pushing a little more risque talents. I mean, they brought in Goldust in 1995, and that was the first push that was not as kid-friendly. I mean, if you thought Goldust was kid-friendly, you had a messed up childhood. Okay, I'm just going to put it that way. We're lucky you don't have bodies in your basement, put the lotion in the basket type situation. The influence of Vince Russo was becoming stronger and more often and becoming more of a prevalent thing, to the point where he would appear on TV as Vic Venom, who was his alter ego who wrote the WWF magazine, wrote some articles for the WWF magazine, which is amazing because he had an alter ego despite the fact that no one knew who the hell he was. I mean, if you were reading The Observer, maybe you did, but I mean, the average WWF fan didn't know Vic Venom from Vince Russo from Vince McMahon's left butt cheek. I mean, they really didn't. And at that point, no one had seen any of them. So those are the glory days, because later we'd see Vince McMahon's full ass and we were all richer for the experience. Anyway, so the Vince Russo influence was coming in, and then in 1996, late 1996, they introduced Raw Magazine. Now, Raw Magazine was going to be geared toward more advanced readers, I guess would be the way to put it. They would still kayfabe you. They were still talking about things, but they were going to do something a little more adult-oriented. So while the WWF magazine still had scoops and these, Man Mountain Rock, why are you so cool type crap, Raw Magazine was going to have Sable basically topless in the centerfold, or Sunny in lingerie on the cover. Back when that was impressive and not just sad. You would have things like Vader, when Vader busted his eye open at Final Four. The Final Four pay-per-view, he busted his eye open. It was just bleeding like crazy. They put that picture on the cover. So it was stuff that was more adult-oriented. It was more pushed toward maybe the guy who, again, when the Attitude Era went into full effect, these are the people that Raw Magazine was for. They weren't for the people who wanted to read scoops or read The Informer, which was a rumor rag segment that never came true. And I don't know if that was like a knock on the Informer, the Wrestling Observer, or whatever it was. I don't know, but it was just awful. And it was just like, oh, they'd talk about these things. They would sort of poke at these ideas of things happening that never happened. And it's like, you guys are in the office. If you were going to put rumors out there, maybe you should occasionally put it in a real one, but they didn't. Whatever. But anyway, the people that were reading that weren't reading Raw. Now, Raw, admittedly, I was sort of in that middle age, because around this time, I'm 12, 13. So I read the WWF magazine, but I would read the Raw magazine now and again. Now, I didn't quite know all the stuff that was going on, but I mean, at the time, Sable and Sunny were still pretty attractive. Sunny hadn't gone into Pornville, and Sable didn't look like someone's suitcase. So if you put the two together, I was going to read that. And I read articles, and there was the one about Shotgun Saturday Night, how they were trying to launch that, and they did an article about that, and they had Terry Funk, who's my favorite wrestler of all time, and Steve Austin fighting in a dimly lit nightclub in New York City. And it was stuff like that. So Raw Magazine was different. Now, I say that because this is where things started diverging. After the brand extension in 2002, Raw Magazine became the magazine of, say it with me, Raw. Monday Night Raw. Of course, they were the Raw brand. This was after the Attitude Era was well and done, after they turned Austin heel for no reason, then did the invasion, and then just kicked the corpse of WCW down the road. So Raw Magazine became the Raw magazine of Raw, and it wasn't adult oriented anymore. It was just kayfabe with anything else. The WWE magazine, which was by this point WWE, screw the pandas, WWE magazine became SmackDown magazine. Now at that time, so to get the full experience, WWE split up everything. To get the full experience of Raw and SmackDown, you had to have a subscription to both magazines. You had to have a SmackDown magazine subscription for SmackDown shows and a Raw subscription for Raw shows. That's insane. And this is at the time where subscriptions were about $20. I had a subscription for a couple years to SmackDown magazine because that was the WWE magazine, and it just got grandfathered in, but it wasn't sustainable. And of course, eventually they would eliminate Raw they would take one and turn it into WWE magazine again after the extension had sort of run its course and everyone knew they were on both shows anyway. And then they took the other and turned it into WWE Kids, which was like taking the 90s WWE magazine and hitting it over the head with a couple times with a hammer until it forgot colors. Like, that's pretty much what it was. It was taking a kid-centric view of the 90s and turning it into like Nick Jr. That's the only thing. It didn't last as long. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but the years were not that many. But it was for kids. It was definitely for kids. It was like for kids who John Cena fans were going, wow, they're young. Like, that's how young it was. And of course, both magazines ended in the 2010s. Again, I'm not exactly sure what year. I don't have this stuff in front of me, but you know, it had a good run. It was from the 80s until 2011, 2012. I mean, that's saying something. Likewise, WCW had a magazine. WCW had their own magazine. It was the same thing. It was kayfabe. It was written by a bunch of office stooges. Ross Foreman comes to mind. Guys who Mark Madden had a column, because that's where he started, was writing for the website and writing for the magazine before someone thought it was a great idea to put him behind a microphone, let him ad lib little inside comments that no one but Vince Russo gave a crap about. Wow, that was a little rant. Anyway, he had a bunch of guys who were writing the magazine. And for a little bit, for a short little bit, ECW had a magazine. Right about the time they had a video game out, they had toys from San Francisco toy makers, and they also had a magazine. Full color, full gloss paper magazine. And it was the same thing. It was kayfabe, but it was different. It was different. It was different for ECW. It didn't last long. It lasted, I want to say, 5 or 6 issues, because ECW at that time was going through so many financial troubles. Their paychecks were basically printed on rubber, and the magazine didn't last. But so all three companies, so during the 90s especially, all three companies had a magazine of some sort at one point or another. So that's saying something. So that's pretty cool. Now, let's get away from the official ones. Now, there were also magazines that were third party. There were, of course, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Yeah, I want to remember every year the PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated 500 comes out. PWI 500 is the ranking of the top 500 wrestlers in professional wrestling. Now, here's the thing about this. The first, I'm going to guess here and say first 150, maybe 200 are people you expect. If you see in 1999, when you saw Steve Austin up there, of course Steve Austin's going to be up there. When you see Triple H, or you see Hulk Hogan, or you see certainly those guys are going to be on the list. Missing them out, no matter where you put them not being on the list is insane. Unless someone was severely injured for a majority of the year, it makes no sense not to include. But after the names you know of now, here's a little trick. Here's why, and I have this on good authority. Anyone who's actually in the business, especially on the independent level, they don't give a damn about their ranking in the PWI 500. Why? Because A, you gotta pay to be considered. You write a little bio and you send it to them, and they rank you wherever they rank you, but you pay. It's like a submission thing. No one's bookings get higher because of it. If anyone books someone based on their PWI ranking, I don't know which one's the bigger mark. I'm just gonna put it out there. But Pro Wrestling Illustrated, again, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, even when Raw magazine was sort of pulling the curtain back a little bit, and wrestling was sort of becoming more realistic in the Attitude Era, where you're talking about real angles, and the angles were a little more reality based. PWI was doing the same thing it was doing in the 70s. It was kayfabing the hell out of people. It was just whatever was going on TV, they wrote an article about it and made you think it was real, which again, it works for a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old. It didn't really work on an 18-year-old. It doesn't work on the guy going to college going, yeah, I like Raw or I like Nitro, but I don't think Steve Austin and Vince McMahon are really trying to hurt each other. So it was a particular audience. There were things like The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling and all these things. And then Bill Apter, the PWI and these are called the Aftermax, but this sort of a misnomer because Bill Apter left PWI in 1999, 2000, something like that, to found WOW magazine, World of Wrestling magazine, and known for. I'm going to show some images for this on the page. So if you're on the page, you check out some of these photos. I'm going to bring up some covers and I'm going to show you. It looked nothing like any other magazine, including the Aftermax, including Inside Wrestling, including PWI, The Wrestler. These were large. The magazine was actually a little bit larger, a little bit thicker too. It covered all major companies. It didn't cover independents as much, but it covered large. It covered the major companies. The magazine itself was larger. It was thicker, almost like a catalog, like a Sears catalog or a Toys R Us catalog. Rest in peace. And it was a little thicker, and it was full color. The magazine usually had some kind of gloss. So the first few I know had sort of a gold foil on the logo, and they would talk about things that were going on. And Bill Apter would write these articles, and they had really cool pictures. It was all full color, and some magazines at the time where they'd have some color photos in the middle, and then the rest of it would be black and white because it was cheaper to print. But WOW magazine was different. It lasted for a couple years, but it didn't last long. And honestly, production-wise, it just had to have been. It was about $4 or $5 at the time when the average WWE magazine cost, I think, $3.50, I think, and WOW magazine itself, because of the cost to produce it and the size and just everything about it, cost, I think, closer to $5. So that's not sustainable long term. And then, of course, there's the independent magazines. Now, these are New Wave Wrestling, and I used to read that one. There used to be one called Toxic. Toxic was spelled with 3 X's, and no, it's not a Rob Black produced porno. No. It was just called Toxic. And that one I remember particularly because it would do a lot of independent. They would get house show pictures, like poorly done, hacky house show pictures, and like they would have not really well lit. You would see that it was The Rock and Triple H, but it wasn't great. But you could make out what it was, and they'd be from weird angles because the good guys got the real good angles, and the guys who were just lucky to be on the other side of the rail got the other angles. And the rest of it was a lot of independents. A lot of independent guys were getting their exposure there. But the problem is, this was a magazine written, I know especially in the case of Toxic, and again, this is a very odd one. I've tried to look it up on Google. It's hard. But Toxic was not necessarily made by people who like wrestling. I know they employed a guy named Stately Wayne Manor, who had made a name for himself as an independent, like a manager, a character, and he was a wrestling guy. But there were other guys who didn't know the product they were reporting on, especially when it comes to the WWF, which is weird because that was the hottest thing going on at this time. And there's one famous one that I remember clear as day. There's a poster, there's a little pull-out poster in this issue, and the issue was of Midian when he was with the Ministry, the eyeball gig. And I swear to God, it's him. I think he's got a guy in a pin. And in the side, they wrote this logo for his name, and it was designed to look disgusting. It was this whole thing. It was actually pretty. It wasn't just plain text. It was actually designed. But I swear to God, they called him Meridian. Yeah, Meridian, like the prime meridian on the map. Yeah, so that tells you about where we're at here. That tells you the kind of people that were making this magazine. They misnamed. Now, I'm not saying they misnamed everybody. I'm not saying that Midian was necessarily a main character, but someone at that magazine should have caught that. That's a very bait. Someone should have caught that before it went to press. The fact that it was even a graphic, someone made that graphic and no one corrected them, amazes the crap out of me. So I always thought that was funny. When Man Mountain Rock got busted for being lame, we were there. It's newsflash. Nature Boy Ric Flair got married for the 5th time to longtime fiancée Wendy Barlow in a ceremony attended by The Undertaker, Michael Hayes, Shane Helms, among others. Ric Flair said he had a great time at the ceremony and looks forward to seeing everyone at the next one. Long Island bro and Jersey Shore alternate Zack Ryder celebrated his 12th year wrestling full-time for the WWE. This comes as a surprise to many in the WWE because they thought they had fired him in 2014. Former talent Eva Marie started a podcast with her husband titled Who Gives a Shit? She says she's committed to the project and will continue to host until something better comes along. Wrestling Renaissance man Paul Heyman had his 53rd birthday recently. He celebrated by bouncing a check to Applebee's. Justin Credible was arrested once again for violating a protective order. One more arrest and he has to legally change his name to Just Incarcerated. That's gonna do it for this time. Let's get back to the show. Now, away from the magazines, away from the reading, well, how else did you get your wrestling? If you were rich, if you were a child of means, as it were, or you liked getting grounded, you would call one of the hotlines. The WWF had a hotline. They would promote it during pay-per-views, they'd promote it during Raw sometimes, so on and so forth. It'd be a lot of kayfabe, maybe a little bit of rumor, an innuendo, but it was a hotline. It made them a little money. It was like buck something a minute. It was that kind of stuff. WCW became more famous for it because they one time had the Hulk Hogan hotline. Yes, it was just Hulk Hogan. He had his own hotline, and I'm gonna show some graphics for that on the page, so just to get a feel for it. I think I have a commercial for it. You have to watch this. Then there was the famous one. When you think of a wrestling hotline, everyone's thinking of this one right now, the WCW hotline, hosted by Mean Gene Okerlund. Part of Mean Gene Okerlund's deal when he signed with WCW was that he would start a hotline, and he would get a cut of the proceeds. He personally would get a cut of the proceeds. So that created an incentive for him to get creative with what he said, and quite frankly, maybe make some stuff up, to be completely blunt honest about it. He would create rumors and all these things, sort of talking. Some of them were legitimately true, and some of them were just made up. I remember one in particular, which was really offensive. Someone had died. Someone in the wrestling business, an older talent, had legitimately died. And he would do these teasers on WCW Saturday Night, and then later on Nitro, he would sort of tease who it is. And one of the teasers was, what recent, wrestling superstar passed away? Call the hotline and I'll tell you. He invited people to call a hotline so he could tell them what old wrestler had died. If that's not exploitation, I don't know what is. I don't even know how to explain that. It was $1.99 a minute, and everyone here knows the hotline number, 1-900-909-9900. If you dial it today, you'll be transported back into a time where Gene Okerlund had slightly more hair, Hogan wasn't a racist, and we all had hopes and dreams. That's a little sad. But yeah, that was the WCW. And for a bit, and for a while there, ECW had a hotline. Of course they did. ECW's hotline was actually staffed by, oddly enough, wrestlers. They were staffed by the wrestlers. They would make up names, despite the fact that Stevie Richards talked about doing it. He would do it, and he'd have to create a name for himself, but people recognized his voice, and he had to pretend like it wasn't him, because the ECW, everything was done by wrestlers. T-shirts were designed by wrestlers. Ring trucks were driven by wrestlers. It was very close-knit, and the hotline was done by Hotline, and the magazines, and as far as the order brochures and things were done by wrestlers themselves. So all three had hotlines. So, and these are things that are gone. I mean, magazines really don't exist. The WWE magazine again went out. WCW went out as a company. ECW went out as a company, and again, their magazine didn't last long. It's suffice to say that all three hotlines are gone because the companies were replaced, and one because the technology was replaced. The people that were, and I'll have a little side here, people were reading the Wrestling Observer. Wrestling Observer used to be, and Figure 4 Weekly, and so on and so forth, they used to be actual newsletters. They were physical newsletters, and even they went digital. But if you were reading the Wrestling Observer or Figure 4 Weekly or whatever, you were more inside than the average fan. Now, with all due respect, were you in the locker room? No, you didn't know as much as you thought you did, but you knew more than the guy who was, reading the stuff about what Duke the Dumpster Drosy does on his day off. So you were a little bit, but not quite, as in as you maybe thought you were. But that kind of thing, that's all been replaced. I mean, Figure 4 Weekly and Wrestling Observer actually combined. So you have Brian Alvarez and Dave Meltzer are together just to survive, and they still make money on it. But they've gone to a digital format. They've gone to a website, podcast. You have to change. WWE tried some things in there. They tried Radio WWF, which was an attempt to sort of bring that online. It didn't work. WCW used to do pay-per-listens, which was they would basically broadcast a show via audio, and you would pay to listen to them describe the event at a time. And honestly, it's at a time that streaming video was like impossible almost, and audio was even iffy, because these were the days of like Real Player G2, like that kind of crap. Give your computer herpes, Real Player G2, and that should have been their slogan. But so audio. So they tried audio, and so as time went on, WB started Bite This, which was an online format, and they would do the video and do these things, these chats, and they tried all this stuff. But the hotlines went out because the hotlines in general were going out. I mean, the only thing now you look at these things, like in general, if you're watching these things, you're watching a TV show real late at night, and some hotline thing comes on. The first thing you probably do in your mind is laugh, because you're thinking, who in their right mind still calls a hotline for anything? I don't care what it is. Miss Cleo should, this psychic hotline stuff should not exist in 2018. These sexy chat lines, whatever. No, because the internet has replaced all of this stuff. There is a chat room at best, but there's a website. There's a social media account. So WB now has the app. They have the network. They have their website, which they've had since the mid 90s, and it's transitioned a lot since the days of, they would send you a disc with PC or IBM, and the disc would be basically the contact on how to get to their website. It was ridiculous. But now, they're using new media and all these things, so the hotline sort of went the way of the dodo. So, the dodo, wow. Anyway, magazines, hotlines are all that. So there used to be different ways of getting to it, and now it's all digital. Now, if you want to read up on things, you go on the website. If you want to and you're not near your computer, you pick your phone. You go on the website on their app. You can go to the network. You can watch TV. You can watch on demand. You can watch Raw and SmackDown 205 Live. You can watch NXT on Hulu. There's all these different ways to get about it. So those kinds of things are a thing of the past. But that's how it used to be. That's a little jog down memory lane, I guess, for anyone who grew up wanting to call these hotlines or knew or remember the ads. Like I said, I'm going to show videos. It's going to on the page. It's going to sort of go into these ads and show you what they were selling, what they were trying to get you to do, what they were trying to get you to pay $1.99 a minute to hear our pre-recorded voicemail, basically, of why Hulk Hogan doesn't like the Giant, like crap like that. That's the kind of stuff you remember. So I'm gonna put some videos up about that. But that's really gonna do it for today. If you have any topics, ideas, or anything you want to throw at me, send it to the page, message the page, put it below the video, contact Frank at ZTO, whatever you want to do. Get a hold of somebody, tell me what you want to do, and like I said, it might be a future episode. And heck, if I pick your idea, I'll give your name, I'll put your name out there and say, you know, this topic came from this guy and girl, whatever, and I'll thank you for the topic. So that's gonna do it for this time. Until next time, my name's Dan. This is Exploder. Have a good one.